listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Today is June 23rd, 174th day of the year. Just 191 days remaining to the year's over. In case you've been living under a rock, our B-2s bombed Iran, took out their nuclear sites. And of course, AOC and her cronies are screaming to high heavens he needs to be impeached. Why don't we impeach her? Today's National Typewriter Day. St. John's Eve. And for those not familiar with St. John's Eve, it's a night filled with vibrant energy and deep symbolism. It celebrates the birth of John the Baptist, and a few saints honored on their birth and others on their death. National Porridge Day, Public Service Day, International Women in Engineering Day, National Widows Day, National Detroit Style, National Detroit Style Pizza Day. Interestingly enough, what gave the media the heads up that there was an operation underway was all the pizzas ordered near the Pentagon. National Let It Go Day, Pink Flamingo Day, National Pecan Sandies Day, National Hydration Day, Soul Storage Week, Waste and Recycling Workers Week, Deaf Blind Awareness Week, Insect Week, Rabbit Week, English Lion Week, National Lightning Safety Awareness Week, Windjammer Days, famous people doing this day, June Carter Cash, Summer Blair, Clarence Thomas, and Melissa Roush. Okay, stories in the news. Details are coming out about Operation Midnight Hammer, the largest B-2 strike in U.S. history. There were only 21 in existence, I think, and 19 are still flying. A Midnight Hammer accomplishes its mission. Confirmation was a little difficult. Former Democratic advisor slams the unhinged calls to impeach Trump over the Iran strike. The course being led by AOC, she used to be worried about her constituents and not what the president was doing. Russia has warned the Trump administration after airstrikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities. They're calling it Pandora's box. And that I would say Putin needs to be worried about his own issues, his war with Ukraine. Pakistan flip-flops on Trump after his attack on Iran, and hours after they recommended he get a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, one of God's anointed is getting involved in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, suspected MS-13 gang member, the one the Democrats have had a meltdown over, but that poor man, just because he's undocumented and a crook, he shouldn't be punished. Simone Biles has deleted her ex account after her feud with Ronnie Gaines over trans athletes. It's William and Kate Middleton are quietly building a trusted team for the inevitable transition when he becomes king. White House slams the CNN report, which claims the Democrats weren't briefed about the Iran strike. The problem is, since most of the CNN reporting is kind of cooked up in the local bar, it's hard to know if they know what they're talking about or not. I hope life threatening heat has invaded 28 states, shattering records. Well, there's been a number of unintended consequences of Hamas's war on Israel, with the U.S. and the global security. When Hamas kicked off the war on October 7th, apparently the plan was for all the terrorist groups to rise up at one time and just crush Israel. And only two did, and both have been stomped into the dirt. Former B-2 pilots revealed the flawless preparation for Midnight Hour operation. There was an armed gunman who attacked the Cross Point Church on Sunday, and he managed to shoot one person in the leg during the Sunday service. So this is in Wayne, Michigan. Wayne, Michigan responded to the active shooter. Upon arrival, officers determined a security guard for the church shot and killed the suspect. And one victim was shot in the leg. I don't know why he let so, but he did. Safety experts are saying stay vigilant and have an escape plan from major American travel hubs. The world is not a safe place, folks. Republicans look to cut the $36 trillion national debt by selling off a number of vacant federal buildings. Yes, there are a number of buildings that are empty. Miami is joining New York City, D.C., and L.A. in strengthening the police presence. The research has shown that ancient Roman fast food included an unexpected type of meal. Ordinary ancient Romans ate luxury meat at fast food shops, according to new research. Thrushes were popular street food, not just a delicacy. Raleigh Gaines was quoted as saying Title IX was meant to protect women, not erase them. And she's absolutely right. Clinton came out from hiding to back Cuomo in the New York City mayoral race. Former President back to meantime HUD secretaries of progressive forces rallied behind Zoran Mamdani. If you want the Democrats to back you, be from someplace else. That's the most anti-American group out there right now. Well, a helicopter flipped and crashed near Michigan waterfront restaurant. It was coming in for a landing and suddenly flipped. Which just shows even pilots have bad days. Israel recovered 3 hostages' bodies from Gaza as the families of those hostages are urging action. ESPN's Rebecca Lobo has apologized for calling America great in the WNBA broadcast. Looks like the WNBA has gone leftist in a big way. And I think that's got it. Well, there's been a lot of discussion about UFOs, which is one of my favorite topics, of course. 10 years I spoke at Roswell until the politics raged ahead, and the individual who gained control didn't want me there because my books outsold his. You know, scientists approach the question of UFOs with methodological rigor based on the fundamental principles of physics and astronomy. UFO testimonies describe behaviors that defy the known laws of physics, such as the sudden movements at high speed, no visible means of propulsion, and ability to change directions instantly. These descriptions often conflict with principles such as gravity and conservation of momentum. On the contrary, ufologists are often more open to the possibility that UFOs could be manifestations of advanced technology from extraterrestrial civilizations. We argue that although we don't understand the technologies involved, that doesn't mean they don't exist. According to them, it's arrogant to assume that humans possess all possible technological knowledge and that extraterrestrial civilizations could solve challenges such as superluminal travel or advanced propulsion methods that are currently unknown to us. Now, one of the best known, I guess you could say, UFO incidents in recent history was the Battle of Los Angeles, February 24th and 25th, 1942. Pearl Harbor was in December of 41. So, of course, everybody was positive the Japanese were going to come attack the West Coast. And so, on the night of February 24th, a few months after we got into World War II, the city of Los Angeles was the scene of an extraordinary event that caused panic and confusion among its inhabitants and the military as well. This incident, become known as the Battle of Los Angeles, began with the observation of unidentified flying objects in the night sky of the California metropolis. Now, this was at a time when fear of an enemy attack was at its peak. The presence of these objects triggered a series of defensive reactions. The anti-aircraft spotlights were activated and swept the sky in search of the enemy. And shortly after that, the anti-aircraft artillery opened fire. Launched a salvo of shells toward the detected objects. The sky lit up from the explosion of the shells and the spotlights. Created a scene that was observed by thousands of residents, awakened by the noise of the explosions and the sirens. If I'm not mistaken, there were about 1,800 aircraft shells fired. Military authorities were on high alert, and the confusion was exacerbated by the lack of clear information about the exact nature of the threat. Now, the incident lasted several hours, during which the objects seemed to move slowly in the sky. Sometimes they stayed stationary, defying conventional explanations. Despite the intensity of bombardment, no only aircraft debris was ever found. No confirmation of an attack was ever determined. After the incident, authorities issued various statements, some suggesting it was a false alarm due to war nerves, others maintained the objects hadn't even been identified. Los Angeles remains one of the most mystifying and controversial incidents involving unidentified flying objects. Raises questions about wartime preparedness, information management, and the possibility of other unconventional explanations. This event's also had a lasting impact on popular culture, inspiring movies and films and documentaries and a lot of conspiracy theories about alien visitation. Now, the observation of these items began shortly after midnight when radars of the military detected an unidentified object approaching the coast of Los Angeles. And the radar operators were already on high alert due to the fear of a Japanese attack, and there had been some Japanese submarines coming close to the coast and fire at various targets. So everybody was on high alert. And they tracked this object as it slowly moved toward the city. And the exact nature of this object has never been clearly identified. It contributed to the atmosphere of tension and mystery surrounding the event. The description of the object varies according to the testimony. Some observers reported seeing a large Zeppelin-shaped object. Others described the formation of several smaller objects. Confusion was exacerbated by the darkness of the night and searchlights sweeping the sky, trying to find the enemy craft. And these powerful light beams combined with the smoke from the anti-aircraft explosions made visible identification of the object even more difficult. The conditions that night were relatively clear. Although visibility was partially reduced by the presence of smoke from the numerous anti-aircraft fire. The moon was almost full, which provided some brightness, but not nearly enough to clearly illuminate the sky. The wind was weak, and significantly affected the directly the shells and the dispersion of the smoke. Now, the exact time of the observation was recorded at 2:25 a.m. That's when the alert was given and the aircraft batteries authorized to open fire. And the bombardment lasted till 4:14 a.m., during which time thousands of shots were fired at the objects. Despite the intensity of the fire, no confirmed debris from the object was found. Now, was there one object or numerous objects? That's never been determined. The lack of debris added to the mystery of the incident. The nature of the object observed during the Battle of Los Angeles remains a subject of debate and speculation. Despite varying descriptions and testimonies, which are often contradictory, it's difficult to form a coherent picture of what happened. What is certain, though, is that the incident caused a great stir among the population of Los Angeles, and left an indelible mark on the annals of UFO sightings. Now, some Navy ships had also encountered the object heading for the coast, and supposedly after the event, the Navy discovered a crashed UFO in the sea, but have not been able to get confirmation of it. Now, one of the first witnesses to what was going on, whose name was Katie, who lived in Santa Monica, reported seeing several luminous objects in the sky shortly after midnight. According to her, these objects didn't resemble any airplanes she'd ever seen. They were oval-shaped, emitted a brilliant light. And she described how these objects moved slowly in the sky, sometimes stationary before they disappeared on the horizon. Then there was an individual named James, now an aircraft projector operator, provided a detailed testimony of what he saw. He was one of the first to spot an unidentified object using his projector. And he described the object as being extremely bright and much larger than any known aircraft at the time. And he said the object seemed to have superior maneuverability, moved against the wind with apparent ease. Then we got Sergeant Mitchell, member of the Coastal Defense, testified to having received the order to fire at the objects after they'd been spotted by several spotlights. According to him, despite multiple anti-aircraft salvos, the projectile seemed to have no effect on the object. It's considered its slow and steady progress across the sky. Another witness, Lieutenant Smith, an Air Force pilot, reported being on alert that night, but didn't get any order to take off. He said from his position on the ground, he saw the events and confirmed the description of the objects as being unusual and not in line with the aircraft at that time period. He highlighted the confusion and agitation among military personnel about the exact nature of the threat. Then there was a local journalist whose first name was Eleanor, documented the reaction of civilians during and after the incident. She collected testimonies from local residents and described a range of emotions from curiosity to terror. They reported feeling a sense of unreality, as if what they were seeing couldn't be true. She also noted the psychological impact of the incident on the community, and people fearing an imminent invasion. Of human origin and otherwise was up for debate. Now, these testimonies, though varied, do paint a picture of a night of intense confusion, aggressive military reactions, and observations of objects that witnesses struggled to explain with the knowledge of the time. What began as an air raid quickly turned into one of the greatest hoaxes in UFO history. Subsequent investigation attempted to unravel the facts of the chaotic night sparked by fear and confusion. In the hours that followed, military and governmental authorities began to investigate the incident. Secretary of War at the time, Henry Stimson, was informed and ordered an immediate investigation. Military questioned witnesses and examined reports from radar stations and observation posts. These testimonies were varied and often contradictory. Some claimed they saw a large Zeppelin-shaped object. Others reported they saw smaller flying objects. Initial reports from the military authorities suggested the possibility of enemy attacks. But no concrete evidence was ever found to support this theory. The Army's final report concluded the incident was probably due to a false alarm. When in doubt, at least until recently, everything has been a hoax. Because we can't admit there's somebody out there who's more advanced than we are. The conclusion didn't satisfy everybody, of course, and numerous alternative theories continued to circulate, including the fact that it was an extraterrestrial visit. And the investigation also examined the damage caused by the aircraft fire. Remember, buildings and vehicles were damaged, and there were several civilian casualties due to falling shell debris. These aspects of the incident were documented in the report, but often overshadowed by the mystery surrounding the object itself. Over the years, the incident of the Battle of Los Angeles has remained a subject of fascination and speculation. Despite investigations and official reports, a lot of questions still remain unanswered. The lack of tangible evidence and contradictory testimonies has left the door open to numerous interpretations and theories. Official investigation, although thorough, failed to provide any definitive explanation, making this incident one of the most intriguing in the history of UFO sightings. Now, the first theory, and the most immediate at the time, was the incident was an enemy attack, specifically a Japanese airline incursion. And this hypothesis was supported by the high tensions following the attack on Pearl Harbor and the fear of a Japanese invasion of the west coast of the U.S. But no concrete evidence was ever presented to support this theory, and the Japanese government denied any involvement in the incident. They did admit to several submarine incursions. The popular explanation is that of misunderstanding caused by the nervousness of the American troops, exacerbated by the context of war. According to this theory, what the enemy took as enemy planes were simply weather balloons or even clouds, misinterpreted by the spotlights and the effects of the anti-aircraft defense. And of course, this hypothesis was reinforced by the fact that no enemy plane debris was ever found. Some ufologists argued that the objects observed were of extraterrestrial origin. This theory is fueled by witness reports that describe the objects as having unusual shapes and movements, not corresponding with the planes of the time. And the fact that the numerous artillery shots failed to shoot down these objects adds to the mystery of this particular theory. This explanation is often dismissed by experts in storage who considered it implausible without tangible evidence. They'd rather believe the balloons. As common speculation suggests, the incident could have been a psychological operation orchestrated by the American government to test the responsiveness and preparedness of the West Coast defenses. And this theory proposes that the objects sighted could have been American planes used in this exercise. This idea remains highly controversial and largely speculative, with no evidence to support it. Finally, some research has suggested the incident could be related to a rare atmospheric phenomenon or optical illusions caused by peculiar weather conditions. The explanation attempts to find the middle ground between observations of strange objects and the lack of material evidence of an attack or extraterrestrial visit. And of course, one thing you have to keep in mind: based on what was said in the Robertson panel, aliens could have landed and raided down the main street, and it would have been covered up. That's just how the government was and still is to a certain extent. Now, after the Battle of Los Angeles, the next documented event was the disappearance of Flight 19 in the Bermuda Triangle. December 5th, 1945, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Now, this event occurred over the Atlantic in the region known as the Bermuda Triangle. On that particular day, 5 torpedo bombers from the U.S. Navy, designated as Flight 19, disappeared without a trace after taking off from Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale. The flight was a routine training mission led by Lieutenant Charles Taylor. He was an experienced veteran of World War II. The planes, TBM Avengers, were equipped to withstand difficult flying conditions and were considered very reliable. Now, the planned mission was to follow a triangular route, joining with a flight east from Florida to the Bahamas and north before returning to base. Shortly after the start of the mission, though, communication between Flight 19 and the base began to reveal a series of worrying problems. Lieutenant Taylor reported his compass wasn't working properly, and visual landmarks didn't match what he knew they ought to be. Now, despite attempts to guide him back to the base, confusion increased and communications became increasingly fragmented. And finally, the last message received from Flight 19 indicated that all the pilots were completely disoriented and didn't even know which direction Florida was. After several hours of erratic flying, contact was lost. Search and rescue operation was immediately lost, including the dispatch of another plane. And that plane also vanished, which deepened the mystery. Despite intensive search, no debris from any of the planes or any sign of the crews was ever found. Now, the incident with Flight 19 has become one of the most famous and enigmatic cases associated with the Bermuda Triangle. That's an area in the Atlantic Ocean notorious for the unexplained disappearance of ships and aircraft. And this mystery continues to spark speculation and theories ranging from unusual natural phenomena to paranormal activities, although no definitive explanations have been accepted. The flight was led, as I said earlier, by Lieutenant Charles Taylor, a very experienced pilot. He had combat experience during World War II. The mission consisted of a simple navigation exercise that was to follow a triangular route. The first segment of that flight would take the planes east from Florida to the Bahamas. The flight plan called for a turn north for the second segment before returning to the starting point to complete the triangle. However, shortly after the start of the mission, there were problems. Taylor reported by radio he was disoriented and couldn't determine his exact position. And as I said, he mentioned the compasses on his plane weren't working properly. Radio communication picked up by the base and other ships indicated that Taylor thought the flight had ended up over the Gulf of Mexico northwest of Florida, when they were actually northeast of their starting point. As the afternoon went on, the weather deteriorated. Weather reports began to indicate an increasing cloud cover and increasingly rough sea in the area where the flight was supposed to be. Communication between the flight route and the base became increasingly sporadic. Messages often fragmented and difficult to understand. Latest communication received from Taylor, increasingly urgent, indicated he was trying to find a way back to Florida. He said visibility was low and flying conditions were difficult. He encouraged the other pilots to stay in tight formation and conserve their fuel as much as possible. Night was beginning to fall, and with it, the chances of accurately locating the planes was decreasing. The last transmission received from Flight 19 was a very confused message, mentioning the water was white and they didn't know where they were. Shortly after that, contact was lost. Despite a vast search and rescue operation launched immediately after the plane's disappearance, after the flight's disappearance, rather, none of the planes or any of the crew members were ever found. The weather conditions during the search were extremely poor, with rough sea and reduced visibility, which complicated rescue efforts. Now, the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, was the main witness to this incident, although indirectly, since his communications were reported by the base. At the start of the exercise, everything seemed normal, but shortly after that, he reported that his compass quit working. Expressed his confusion about his exact position and that of his squadron. The pilots in the group also reported similar anomalies with their navigation instruments. Another individual who's been quoted is Lieutenant Robert Cox, the pilot who was flying near the area at that time. He heard Taylor's communications, trying to help him determine his position. Cox reported Taylor seemed disoriented and unsure which direction to follow to return to base. And he also noted the weather conditions are becoming difficult, further complicating navigation. And the radio operators at the Fort Lauderdale Naval Base, where the flight took off, also witnessed the radio exchanges. They tried to guide Taylor and his squadron back to the base, but the communications were intermittent and quite a great confusion. At one point, Taylor even mentioned he and his squadron are heading toward the Florida Keys, which is geographically incorrect. It added to the complexity of the situation. Finally, another indirect but crucial testimony comes from the subsequent research reports. After the disappearance of the flight, a vast search operation was launched. Testimony to the crews of the ships and planes involved in this search revealed that absolutely no trace of the planes or pilots was ever found, despite improved weather conditions and relatively calm sea. And these testimonies together paint a disturbing picture of a group of experienced pilots faced with an inexplicable situation that one of the greatest enigmas of aviation. The precise details of their observations and communications continue to fuel speculation and theories about what could have happened. The initial investigation was conducted by the U.S. Navy immediately after the disappearance of the planes. Initial reports indicated that the flight, led by the experienced instructor, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, had encountered navigation problems shortly after taking off from Fort Lauderdale. Interceptor radio communications suggested that Taylor was disoriented and the plane's compasses weren't functioning properly. And that search began shortly after the last radio transmission from Flight 19. And despite the scale of the search operation, which included hundreds of ships and aircraft, no debris from the Avengers were ever found. Navy's investigation had to rely primarily on the testimonies of other pilots and the recordings of communications between the aircraft and the base. Testimonies collected during the investigation revealed that the weather conditions were relatively mild at the time of the flight, and other pilots flying in that area had not reported similar technical problems. This led to speculations, of course, about Taylor's mental state and competence, and although those who knew him described him as experienced and competent pilot, some of the things he was saying did lead to confusion. The Navy released an official report in 1946, concluding the incident was due to unknown causes or reasons, and this vague conclusion fueled public speculation, gave rise to various theories, including those suggesting paranormal phenomena or extraterrestrial interference, although nothing of the sort was mentioned in the official reports. In the following years, other investigations were conducted, included some by civil organizations and independent researchers. These investigations often sought to verify the weather conditions, navigation errors, and even the possibility of a collective mechanical failure, but none managed to provide a satisfactory definitive explanation. The declassified archives from years later showed the Navy considered several scenarios, including the hypothesis the planes could have flown in circles till they ran out of fuel. But the lack of concrete evidence and debris made it impossible to confirm this theory or any other. The investigation of Flight 19 remains one of the most mysterious and debated in the annals of military aviation. Despite decades of research and speculation, the exact fate of the planes and their crews has never been elucidated, leaving an indelible mark on the Bermuda Triangle region and on popular culture. Now, there have been a number of theories. The first one suggested that magnetic anomalies in the Bermuda Triangle could have disoriented the pilots of Flight 19. The triangle is known for its magnetic variations that can affect compasses. Aircraft's navigation instruments could have been disrupted by these anomalies, leading the pilots off their planned course and possibly running out of fuel at sea. This hypothesis is supported by reports at the time indicating that flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, expressed confusion about his geographical position. Another popular theory is that of extreme weather conditions. The Bermuda Triangle is known for its sudden and violent storms that can arise quickly and without prior warning. Some researchers believe that Flight 19 could have been caught in such a storm, losing control or suffering critical damage that would have led to their loss. This theory is reinforced by the fact that weather was reported to have been particularly turbulent on the day of the disappearance. Additional natural explanations are more controversial, fantastic theories. One of them is alien intervention. Some ufologists and conspiracy theory enthusiasts suggest the planes were absorbed or destroyed by UFOs. Although this idea is widely rejected by the scientific community, it continues to captivate the public's imagination and stimulates the multitude of speculations and fictional stories about the Bermuda Triangle. The speculation involves advanced technology or unknown phenomena, such as portals to other dimensions or small black holes. These ideas, although extremely speculative without concrete evidence, are sometimes discussed in context of mysterious disappearance of the Bermuda Triangle. They do suggest the region could be a hotspot for physical phenomena not yet understood by current science. And finally, there are those who believe that disappearances are simply the result of cumulative human errors combined with natural hazards. The triangle is a frequently traveled area for navigation and flight, and statistically increases the chances of accidents. Advocates of this theory argue that the legend of the Bermuda Triangle is a mix of myths amplified by coincidence and misinterpretation of events. Well, from the Bermuda Triangle, 1945, let's go to the summer of 1946. The ghost rockets, seen in various localities across Sweden. The ghost rocket incident in Sweden during the summer of '46 represents one of the first major waves of UFO sightings in Europe after World War II. At that time, Europe was still in full reconstruction. The political climate was marked by increasing tensions between the Eastern and Western blocs, which of course led to the Cold War. In this context, reports of unidentified flying objects caused great concern among populations and governments. The ghost rockets were mainly described as missile-like objects, but with no clear indication of their origin. They were reported mainly in Sweden, but also in other Nordic countries. Witnesses described objects crossing the sky at high speed, sometimes accompanied by whistling noises or explosions. The Swedish government, taking these incidents seriously, launched a official investigation. And despite numerous theories ranging from technological explanations such as experimental missiles to natural phenomena or collective hallucinations, no definitive explanations have ever been provided. Ghost rockets incident remains an intriguing and unresolved chapter in the history of identified aerial phenomena. August 9, 1946, near Lake Kamjala, located in Sweden, about 6:30 in the afternoon. Several witnesses saw a strange object crossing the sky at impressive speed. The object, described as cylindrical, was about 15 meters long and had a shiny metallic appearance. It didn't show any visible wings or signs of conventional propulsion, such as components or reactors. Weather conditions were clear, unobstructed sky, which allowed very sharp visual observation. The object was seen moving from north to south before abruptly plunging into the lake with a muffled noise, suggesting an explosion. Later searches didn't turn up any trace of debris, adding a layer of mystery to the incident. Witnesses also reported the object made no engine noise before the impact, which is unusual for a craft of this size. Flight path was stable, no signs of turbulence or deviation, suggesting precise control or navigation. After the impact, a column of smoke was observed rising from the point of impact on the lake, but that smoke quickly dissipated. This specific incident is part of a larger wave of similar observations across Sweden, where over 2,000 reports were recorded in 1946. Observations are often accompanied by descriptions of objects plunging into lakes or crashing to the ground, but without leaving recoverable debris or concrete evidence after sites were inspected. Absence of tangible debris and ephemeral nature of the observations have led to great speculation and thorough investigation, both nationally and internationally. Despite this, though, the exact origin and nature of these ghost rockets has never been clarified. Leaving this incident as one of the great unsolved mysteries of modern ufology. And the early significant testimonies comes from a pilot of the Swedish Air Force, Captain Gustav Carlson, July 10th, 1946, while he was flying in the city of Malmö. He saw what he described as a bright, streamlined object crossing the sky at incredible speed. According to his report, the object made no sound, left no visible trail, unlike the jet planes of the time. On July 19th, collective observations made by a group of swimmers on a beach near Stockholm. They described seeing a silver, cigar-shaped object diving into the nearby lake before disappearing without a trace. Observations particularly disturbing, as several witnesses reported seeing the object briefly emerge from the water before it flew off at a high speed. Another notable testimony is that of Eric Ruderswam, an amateur astronomer. August 12, 1946, he was observing the night sky from his private observatory when he noted the presence of an unidentified flying object. He described this object as being oval-shaped with an intense light emanating from its center. He said the object moved erratically, changing direction several times before it vanished on the horizon. August 28, 1946, the geologist working in northern Sweden also reported an observation. They described an object similar to a rocket with a trail of fire at the back crossing the sky at a dizzying speed. They watched it for several seconds before it vanished, leaving the witnesses perplexed about its nature and its origin. Finally, one of the most detailed testimonies provided by a Swedish Army officer, Lieutenant Lars Erik Blom, September 5, 1946, while he was on patrol near the Norwegian border. Blom and his unit observed a bright object crossing in the sky. The object, which was described as metallic and cylindrical in shape, was followed for several minutes. He noted in his report the object seemed to be under intelligent control, performing maneuvers that defied the capabilities of aircraft at that point in time. The Ghost Rocket incident in Sweden, which probably took place in 1946, sparked a vast investigation conducted by Swedish authorities with the collaboration of military and international organizations. First sighting of these mysterious flying objects resembling rockets or missiles reported shortly after the end of World War II, and testimonies multiplied across the country. The initial reaction of the Swedish military was to treat these objects with great caution, given the context of the time. Marked by the emerging Cold War and international tension, the Swedish Air Force quickly set up a special unit to investigate this phenomenon. The unit was composed of aeronautics specialists, meteorologists, and physicists. Initial stages of the investigation involved gathering testimonies from people who had observed these ghost rockets. These testimonies came from various sources: pilots, air traffic controllers, ordinary citizens, anybody with anything to report. Common descriptions included elongated objects with luminous trail crossing the sky at high speed and sometimes accompanied by a whistling or explosion sound. In parallel, the military authorities analyzed the available radar data and aerial photographs, but the often didn't corroborate the visual observation. This added a layer of complexity to the investigation. It was difficult to determine the exact nature and origin of these objects without the concrete material evidence. In response to the increase in the number of reports and the lack of clear answers, the Swedish government sought international assistance, particularly from the U.S. and the U.K. Experts from these countries have participated in the investigation, bringing their expertise in aeronautical technology and intelligence. As the investigation progressed, several theories were explored to explain the observations. Among these, the hypothesis of missile tests or experimental devices by the Soviets was often mentioned, although no concrete evidence was ever found to support this idea. Other theories included rare weather phenomena or space debris. At least they didn't bring up weather balloons. Despite months of intensive investigation and inquiry into the ghost rockets, never reached a definitive conclusion. Final reports highlighted the lack of tangible evidence and left open the question of the origin of these objects. This lack of a clear answer has helped fuel speculation and conspiracy theories about the incident. It remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of ufology. The most common theories is the ghost rockets are missiles or experimental devices, probably of Soviet origin. At that time, the Cold War was beginning to start, and the Soviet Union was actively engaged in development of new military technology. Some experts suggest these objects could be tests of ballistic missiles or other types of weapons USSR wasn't not quite ready to publicly unveil. Hypothesis is supported by the fact that several of the observations made in the Baltic Sea, a strategic area for the Soviets. Another explanation suggests the ghost rockets could be misinterpreted meteorological and astronomical phenomena. Meteors entering the Earth's atmosphere could be mistaken for flying objects, especially eyewitnesses not trained at recognizing this phenomena. Theory is often dismissed by ufologists who argue that the trajectories and behaviors of reported objects don't match those of meteors. Some researchers propose a psychological explanation, suggesting the observation of ghost rockets could be a result of kind of mass hysteria or collective psychosis, fueled by post-war tensions and fear of a new confrontation. According to this theory, witnesses may have projected their anxieties on the natural phenomena or ordinary planes, perceiving them exotic or supernatural threats. And finally, there's inevitably the theory that attributes to ghost rockets to extraterrestrial visitors. This area is popular in the UFO community, and speculated these objects could be probes or exploration vessels from other civilizations. Well, from Sweden in 1946, let's go to Maury Island, Washington State, June 21st, 1947. Now, the Maury Island incident, which occurred in June of 47, was one of the most first reported UFO sightings in modern history, preceding Roswell by a few days. Located in the state of Washington, Maury Island is part of the Vashon Island archipelago, a peaceful, sparsely populated place that makes the inlet all the more intriguing. On the day in question, local businessman named Harold Dahl was sailing near the island's coast to collect driftwood. It's a common practice in that area. What started as an ordinary workday took an extraordinary turn, and he and his crew of 6 saw 6 unidentified flying objects in the sky. According to witnesses, these objects were circular in shape, all of a sudden resembling flying donuts. Dahl reported one of the objects malfunctioned, began to lose altitude, even ejecting what appeared to be metallic debris. It damaged his boat, injured his son, and killed his dog. After the incident, Dahl was approached by a man in black who allegedly warned him not to discuss what he'd seen. This account's become a key element of men in black mythology associated with UFO sightings. The Maury Island incident remains a fascinating, mysterious case in the study of unidentified aerial phenomena, fueling debates and theories about extraterrestrial presence and government responses to these events. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sky was partially cloudy, but visibility remained excellent. An ideal weather condition for a day of work at sea. Suddenly, Dahl spotted 6 flying objects of a circular shape, hovering about 600 meters above his boat. These objects, who were estimated diameter of about 30 meters each, were metallic and seemed to emit a glow that wouldn't be the reflection of the sun. Their surface was smooth, without any visible marks or external structures like wings or windows. He reported these objects had moved with astonishing precision and tight formation before one of them began to lose altitude as if it was in trouble. Object briefly stabilized before resuming its descent, dangerously approaching Dahl's boat. In his testimony, he described how the object began to eject some sort of material resembling lava on molten metal, which fell into the water and over the deck of his boat, causing property damage and, as I said, injuring his son and killing his dog. The other object, seemingly reacting to their companion's distress, positioned himself above it, formed a sort of lid or shield over the damaged object. Shortly after that, the object in difficulty righted itself and then resumed an initial formation before speeding off to the west, vanishing from Dahl and his son's view within seconds. The incident, which only lasted a few minutes, left Dahl deeply shocked and perplexed. He noted the water around his boat was bubbling and hot to the touch after the debris fell, suggesting the ejected material was extremely hot. Dahl recovered some of the debris, which was metallic in nature, very light, and blackened by heat. This detailed observation report by Harold first documented cases of UFOs where debris was recovered after a close encounter. Despite the absence of photographic evidence and the precision of the details provided by Dahl and the physical damage observed on his boat, there have been discussions and speculations for decades. One of the first witnesses, Harold Dahl, was working on a rescue boat near Munger Island when he saw these 6 saucer-shaped objects in the sky. According to his testimony, these objects were in formation and seemed to be made of a shiny metal. He described one of them as being in trouble, losing altitude before stabilizing. Shortly after that, the scientists began to inject what appeared to be lava, a similar material that fell into the sea and hit the deck of his boat and caused the damage I discussed. Fred Chrisman, another witness who accompanied Dahl, corroborated this observation. He added the debris falling from the objects not only damaged the boat but killed the dog who was on board and injured Dahl's son. Chrisman described the object as being silent but having a disruptive effect on their environment. Later, the seawater was boiling under the objects and heated by an intense force. Third witness, an unidentified woman, was on the beach of Moore Island, reported seeing the object from a different perspective. She described seeing 5 objects in proper formation with a 6th seeming to have technical difficulties. She also mentioned the presence of a strange substance falling from the sky, which she compared to molten metal. Testimonies of these 8 observers were supplemented by those of several other local residents and visitors to the island who reported seeing similar objects in the sky about that same time. Some described the objects as emitting a brilliant light. Others noted an unusual silence during the incident, only by the sound of the debris hitting the water. These collective testimonies provide a coherent overview of the incident, although the exact details vary slightly between witnesses. What remains constant is the account. In the accounts, the presence of unidentified flying objects exhibited behaviors and technological characteristics that don't correspond to aircraft or natural phenomena known at the time. The initial reactions were marked by a certain urgency given the period of tension post-World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. Military authorities, particularly the U.S. Air Force, were the first to respond. Investigative teams were dispatched to the island to question the witnesses and examine the sites where the objects had been spotted. Testimonies collected during the investigation varied, but often consisted on certain details. Witnesses generally described flying objects of discordial or oval shape, sometimes accompanied by bright lights and high-speed movements. These descriptions fueled speculations about the possibility that advanced technology may be non-terrestrial. The initial reports from military investigators attempted to rationalize the observation by attributing it to natural phenomena or confusion with conventional aircraft. But the lack of concrete evidence and persistence of testimonies led to a deadlock in the investigation. Faced with the inability to provide a definitive explanation, the authorities have classified a large part of the investigation results. This lack of transparency has fueled conspiracy theories and public distrust with official explanations. In conclusion, despite the efforts made, the investigation of the Moore Island incident has been able to completely demystify the reported events. Classified documents from the years have only reinforced the aura of mystery surrounding the incident, leaving many questions unanswered. One of the most widespread theories is that of extraterrestrial intervention. This hypothesis suggests the observed object was a spacecraft of non-Earthly origin. Supported to this theory based on several elements, such as the description of the object, which didn't correspond to any known device at the time, and the behavior of the pilot, who seemed to perform maneuvers impossible for a human aircraft. And some witnesses reported seeing strange life forms near the object, which reinforced the idea of an extraterrestrial origin. Another theory put forward is that it was a secret military project. According to this hypothesis, the observed object could be a prototype of an airplane or drone secretly developed by the government and the military. And this theory is supported by the fact that the incident occurred shortly after the end of World War II, a period marked by intense research and development in the field of aviation. Supporters of this hypothesis also point out the government may have been motivated to conceal the true nature of the object for reasons of national security. And there's a third theory that suggests the incident could be the result of an optical illusion or mistake. Some experts in optics and meteorology suggested that particular atmospheric conditions could create deceptive visual effects, making an extraordinary object appear as an inexplicable phenomenon. This hypothesis is often invoked to explain other UFO sightings, but it remains controversial in the case of the Maury Island incident due to the specific details reported by the witnesses. And finally, there's a less conventional theory that suggests that the incident could be related to paranormal phenomena or parallel dimensions. This hypothesis is generally less accepted by the scientific community, but it does attract the attention of some paranormal researchers. According to this theory, the object could be a manifestation of forces or entities of another dimension which could explain its unusual appearance and abilities. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, we'll be talking about unexplained UFOs. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a true